Welcome to Breaking Down Patriarchy. I'm Amy McPhie Allebest. In all the episodes of Breaking Down Patriarchy, we've talked about women in politics, women in education, women in activism, in the arts, in the sciences, and so many other fields. But we've spoken relatively little about women in business. And this is a really important topic that shouldn't be neglected. For better or worse, the business sector influences every other sector of society. And when the majority of businesses are run by men, and they are, only 10% of the Fortune 500 currently have female CEOs, then women's perspectives are underrepresented, and our culture struggles to move beyond the patriarchal norms that were handed down to us from previous generations. For this reason, I was fascinated to read the book Worthy: From Cornfields to Corner Office of Microsoft by Jane Boulware. I absolutely loved the book, and I'm thrilled to welcome Jane to the podcast today. Welcome, Jane.
Amy, I'm so happy to be here, and what a great, amazing topic. Can't wait for our conversation.
I'm really, really excited about it and so enjoyed your book. So we'll start out as we usually do by me introducing you professionally, and then I'll ask you to introduce yourself more personally with details about where you're from and how the different factors in your life brought you to do the work that you do. But first of all, the official bio is from the Cornfields of Iowa, Jane Boulware. Is that correct?
Yes.
Boulware. Okay, I'll start that sentence again. I should have asked first. From the cornfields of Iowa, Jane Boulware defied expectations to lead billion-dollar businesses and rise as a top Microsoft executive. By 52, she had launched 3 major ventures, navigated the U.S.'s largest merger, and left a trail of influential leaders behind her. Passionate about empowering others to recognize their worth, Jane is a positive catalyst of change and a dynamic speaker, mentor, and board member. Jane cherishes time outdoors with her family. And importantly, this is great that this is right up front in the episode, Jane. All proceeds from her book, Worthy, are committed to the Boys and Girls Clubs of America's Youth of the Year scholarships. That's so awesome. And I'll ask you more about that in a minute, Jane. And she lives in Bellevue, Washington, and I believe also in the desert, as we were just talking about. Is that right, Jane?
It is, at least for a few months of the year. I actually enjoy the rain of Seattle, so I'll split our time. Rain for myself, sun for my husband.
Love it. That's great. Yeah, both gorgeous
compromise.
places.
Yes.
So let's start from the beginning. I would love it if you could tell us about your upbringing in Iowa and how that shaped your worldview.
You know, it's interesting, Amy, because I've read about you as well, and you kind of were growing up in similar circumstances, which is very modest household. We didn't have a lot, but what we didn't have, we either borrowed, made, or, figured out. And I was born the fourth of 5 kids in a 1-bedroom house. And there just weren't many expectations for us kids, not just because I was a woman, but in general. We were a very blue collar family. We worked hard together to make things come together. And the expectations for me was really stay on the good side of the church and the law in that order. So, the expectation was basically not much. I would, of course, do well in school or go to school, and then probably stay local, have kids, et cetera, as the women before me had always done. And instead, I always was one, my mom said, Jane, you always were a tough clay to mold. You just never listened. And I decided early in my life that I wanted I wanted more. I wanted to, I looked at the situation that I was in, and it wasn't bad. It just wasn't for me. And so I did do the unconventional thing in our family, which was going to college, and got a scholarship to go to college because of a gnarly old nun. And had that not happened, had I not met that gnarly old nun, I may not have gone to college. I may not have been sitting here before you now. And I certainly wouldn't have written a book that I would be able to give the proceeds to Boys and Girls Club kids, just like someone did for me, so that they can go to college and open a world to a life they may not know exists.
That's really beautiful. Well, since you started talking about it, let's talk about Boys and Girls Club. Can you talk about why you chose this particular charity to donate to?
It's an organization that provides a safe place for kids, for all kids, regardless of their circumstances. Although many of the children that go there don't really have an alternate safe place to go after school. They provide, a positive adult. It provides an opportunity to help with school and learning, after school care. It provides after school meals and snacks and athletic activities. And most importantly, it provides a positive place where people can think about, the kids can think about a future beyond where they are today. And in my case, honestly, that was the biggest thing. People would say, "Did you always dream of this?" And the answer was, I didn't know to dream of a world I didn't know existed. And so I'm very keen on the Boys and Girls Club because it is the largest youth services organization in the world, and it genuinely makes a difference on the ground. Where I am, I'm at a local organization, and when we do fundraising, all of those funds go to helping our kids directly. So I feel really good knowing that, honestly, I think it's an organization that changes lives for today and for into the future.
That's really great to know about. I've heard of it definitely, but I've never been involved in it, and kind of was thinking about it from reading it. I think it's just right on the book jacket when I was reading the book, and thought I need to look more into that, because I feel like um, the way that I like to direct my resources, my time and energy and donations, for me personally, and there's so many worthy, wonderful causes, but early on in people's lives, like interventions that result in having more choices and being able to like choose a path that enables self-actualization. Like the earlier the better, almost. Do you know what I mean?
I totally do. And there's two things about that. One is, not all the kids that go there are kids that who need us most. It's all kids, because all kids
Mm-hmm.
need that. But in the process of coming together, kids that have means and wealth, kids that don't, they come together on a common ground, and they realize there's no difference between them. And they get to see and experience something, circumstances they might not have otherwise seen and experienced. That's one thing. The second thing is, I am so passionate about, if we're going to change the world, we fundamentally have to get new, different voices and experiences in places of decision making. In order to do that, we have to give kids and people today that are striving and struggling that opportunity to rise up. And what better place to start than when someone's in middle school or high school, et cetera, to raise their line of sight and their gaze, so that they see themselves as someone worthy, as being a person that can influence decisions, that can change the status quo, that can be a person of influence and change.
Yeah.
And so I really, if you can't tell, I'm passionate about it. I believe in it pretty closely, pretty
Yeah.
strongly.
Yeah, that's so great. Okay, well, that led me perfectly to the next question I was going to ask you, because you talked about feeling internally that they're worthy, right? Like to
Mhm.
be able to envision, okay, what path do I want? What are my goals? And then feeling worthy of being able to achieve those goals. So that leads us to the title. And I wanted to ask you, the book title again is Worthy: From Cornfields to Corner Office of Microsoft. And the whole book does really vividly depict your journey from rural Iowa to becoming a top. There it is.
There you
Perfect.
go.
I love it. Okay, I'm glad you're showing it actually for those who are watching this. Some are listening, but the book title, that was the next question, says unworthy and then has the crossed out. So the title is Worthy, but you have in your mind of like, there's something about being unworthy that's getting crossed out. And that actually really resonated with me. So can you tell us about all those aspects of the title?
Man, I can. I noticed the book's not called Jane Boulware. Look what she did. Be like Jane
Mm.
Boulware. Here's the 5 steps to get to the corner office of Microsoft. If you're looking for a program or a how-to book, this is not that. This was called Unworthy, with the uncrossed off, because the book is as much about the uns as it is about the worthy. I genuinely believe that we have to undo our uns, because we can be empowered, encouraged, enabled in our career and in our lives. But if we don't feel worthy, if we feel unable, uncourageous, unpowerful, then no one can do that but ourselves. The only way to become able, powerful, and courageous is by undoing our own uns. So I crossed off the because the book is very much about overcoming my uns and the journey that I went through. Because on the outside, people would look at me and say, well, I can't be literally, people would say, I can't be like you. If only I were like you. Or they would come and want to be coached or mentored and say, what's your secret sauce? How do you have this so figured out? well, they feel like they're a hot mess, but I will tell you, everybody's a hot mess sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So I called it Unworthy and wrote stories that were real and relatable so that people would see the inside of my journey, not just the outside of my journey. It was like turning myself inside out. I did not find a lot of books out there by women, particularly, that talked about the trade-offs, the challenges, the fear. I call it FUD, fear, uncertainty, and despair, that talked honestly and openly about their FUD on their journey. And whether the journey is to the corner office or the journey is to the grocery store, we all have FUD. And I wanted to share that so people wouldn't feel alone and hopefully be inspired to think, maybe, to rethink what they could achieve.
Yeah. Well, that certainly came through. And so now I'd actually love it if you don't mind sharing a particular instance where you like undid an or you kind of challenged that fear, uncertainty, or despair. Yeah, if you want to choose like an anecdote from the book to share about how you overcame one of those things.
Certainly. I was running a business that was not doing well. It was after the Scott and Paper merger, and I was the vice president of Scott, and I was accountable for turning the business around. And I was in a meeting, most of the time I was in meeting with all men, and I was often the only woman. And I would often sit in those meetings and think, oh my gosh, I don't belong here. If they knew how scared I was, if they knew that I did not have a clue what I was doing, maybe they do know. They probably are judging me. They do know I'm not worthy. And I would get in this cycle and I would just go round and round. And I would leave these meetings then, and I was leading a team. And I would try to be someone to the team that would be strong and have the answers and know what I was doing, because I didn't want them to see and reflect how scared I was on the inside. And it was only in being brought to my knees. At the time, I had bulimia, but even so, it was really seeking an unhealthy way to deal with my uncertainty. It was only when I accepted the fact that it was okay not to know. And it was okay to admit that I needed help and that I was afraid. And in the process of doing that, I started to invite my team to these meetings, because in many situations, I didn't have all the answers. They knew, and started bringing other people that were the experts in those areas to the team. And I started leading instead of feeling like I had to have all the answers, and inviting help from those around me. And that's when, from a leadership perspective, from a business perspective, from a personal perspective, things began to change for me, because I didn't see other people as a threat that I didn't want to get found out about. I welcomed that in. And the more I did that, I thought people were going to reject me and say, I knew all along she wasn't that good. And instead, the opposite happened. It was like, oh, yeah, she's got her act together because she's got a really strong team. And I feel confident then that they know what's going on. So that's an example.
Yeah, I so appreciate your willingness to share those stories. And I think that's why it can really resonate and really help, because like you said, I mean, sometimes you'll read a quote unquote self-help book or some inspiring story, and if you can't relate and you just think, well, that person never felt that feeling of unworthiness, then they're like in a different category of human. So how can I even learn from it? And so for you to just bear everything and admit that you kind of didn't know what you were doing is so, so helpful.
Probably one of the best compliments that I get from people that read the book is that they laughed 1 minute, they snorted in laughter 1 minute, and they projectile cried in the next, which is a really nice compliment, because that says that they could relate to it and it was real. Yep. And, I think a lot of people deal with FUD, fear, uncertainty, and despair, or whatever you want to call it. Which kind of brings me out to the point. I finally have learned that I'm not afraid to be afraid anymore. That's really an important thing, because we think of fear as something to be avoided, and as something to be ashamed of, and as something to not let other people see, almost as a weakness. I'm afraid, therefore I don't have it figured out. I don't want people to see that because I'm a fraud. Mm-hmm. I've reframed that. For me, Being afraid means that I am stretching, I am growing, I am pursuing something that's outside my comfort zone. I am over my skis and I might fail. I might fail in this endeavor, but there's a big difference between failing at something and being a failure. So I'm kind of proud of being afraid. I'm kind of proud when I say to someone, I don't know what I'm doing. It's scary. I'm afraid. Will you help me? Or even, but I'm trying. So bear with me. So I have taken a different approach to failure and to fear.
I love that. I love that. And I do think that kind of the unwillingness to admit any vulnerability or any, something that you don't know, that unwillingness has historically been kind of a patriarchal norm, right? Like the
Very
pressure,
much so.
right? It's considered a kind of a masculine trait to just be so strong that you're impervious to, weakness or criticism or whatever, and you can never admit, which is a terrible little box for a man to be in too,
Oh
that
my
that's a
gosh. Can you
masculine norm,
imagine?
right? It's
Yeah,
terrible.
it is terrible. And I will also tell you that acknowledging that you are uncertain or acknowledging there are 3 words that the ego cannot speak. I don't know. Actually 6, because I am wrong is another thing that is very ego driven. And I've found it to be very disarming when I'm in a group of men or people. I'm the chairman of the board right now for the Boys and Girls Club, and we have people on our board that are billionaires and people that are beginners everywhere on the spectrum. But when they walk through the door, all I ask from them is that they leave their checkbooks, their titles, everything at the door, because I don't care. They need to bring their hearts, their minds, their hands. I say their head, hands, and heart into the door, because that way people get to be real. And that way, if you don't know or you are afraid or you need help, it's a lot easier to talk about.
Oh, I love it. I love that. And I feel the culture changing in that direction. And I'm so, so grateful that it is. Okay, I want to back up in your personal story and have you tell a little bit more about kind of your youth. There was a whole episode of your life where you were paying for college by selling used carpets. And you say you got through on that used carpet business and your mom's prayers. So, can you talk about both of those things?
I had a number of jobs, right? I would clean houses to help pay for the rent, and I worked in concession stands, which I say contributed more to my bottom than my bottom line, because I ate a lot of hot dogs and popcorn that year. But ultimately, what helped me pay for tuition was selling used carpeting. My dad actually laid carpeting for a living, and he would lay carpeting for the day, and then he would bring the scraps home and keep them in the garage, and he would pile them up, and when the pile got big enough, he would take them to the city dump. And it was actually the town dump. We didn't live in a city. Anyway, he would take them to the dump. And we were sitting, my roommates and I were sitting with our feet up on the bed because the floors were tile and they were so cold in Iowa that we just couldn't stand it. And the girls said, man, why do we not have rugs? I would pay so much if this was carpeted. This is crazy. And I thought of my dad's garage. So I took my crappy old car and drove the 65 miles to my dad's house and asked if he would help me and teach me how to seam together the scraps to make big enough carpets that I could take back to school. Now, what was unique about that is it was a clever way to solve a problem. But the biggest challenge in that for me was asking my dad for help. Because in the family that I grew up in, you could do something without asking. You could help someone. You could, you could do all of those things on your own. Someone could help you. You just didn't ask for help. Asking for help just was not done. And that perspective really influenced my life for quite a while, which is why learning to ask for help and overcoming and believing that that's a weakness and a strength instead of a weakness was really hard for me to do. And at the end of the day, he smiled, and it was a great opportunity for the two of us to work together. I rolled up those carpets, put them on my car. I can only imagine what it must have looked like to see my crappy old car with literally twine holding the rugs going down the highway. Probably lost a few of them along the way. I don't know.
Crazy.
And I would pull up at college, pull up in the parking lot and sell them, and made a ton of money. like
And yeah, I remember you made
ton
a
of
ton
money.
of money doing it. Yeah. I mean, to
Yeah.
the point that it seems like you almost couldn't keep up with demand and it got like, oh my gosh, how am I
You know,
gonna?
I had learned so much from a business perspective that time,
Mhm.
because if there was a line, I just kept charging more for it. For the carpeting.
Mhm.
And I learned basically, because the scraps were made out of, some were shag and some were pilo and some were pile and different types. And I
Mhm.
kind of learned how to position the different rug types for guys versus girls, and the softness versus the durability and the cleanability. I really honed my marketing and sales ability at that time. So in my book, I say used carpet salesperson was probably one of my most preferred titles out of all the titles I have, because it felt like it was you know, a business in the making for a person in the making. Because I was
Mm.
just trying to figure it out, and those scraps that would have been thrown away were put together in such a way that they made something useful out of that.
Mm.
And I think so often, Amy, we look at the scraps and pieces of our lives and we think they're worthless. But when we put them together, especially with someone else's help in a different way, it becomes incredibly valuable.
Mm.
You just have to look at it and twist and turn it maybe a different way, or rethink it. And I just love that story because it taught me so much about using scraps and making something valuable out of it, how to position it, and how sometimes the solutions in our lives are unconventional. And other people would have said, "You're crazy, Jane." But that crazy got me through college.
Yeah, I love it. I loved that part of the book. Okay, tell us about your mom.
Madonna Bernadette.
Mhm. It's a
Uh,
fabulous name, like, you couldn't make that up.
no, you
Couldn't get her
couldn't
in a
make it.
novel, right? It's
Doesn't
so
it just sound like
wonderful.
a saint's name? She was no saint, but it sounds like a saint's name. And I will tell you, before I tell you about Madonna Bernadette, I shared with her before she passed. I read the book with her before she passed, and I wanted to make
Mm,
sure she was okay with what I wrote about her, and she was.
mm,
And I told her, asked her to give me a sign when she passed, and she's like, "Jane, it doesn't work that way. Once you go to heaven, that's it." And I always kind of chuckled, and I thought, well, Mom, if you think about it, give me a sign. And so there have been many times that I feel like she's given me a sign since she passed away a couple of years ago. But
mm,
when I wrote the book, I said my goal was to get 100 um, testimonials or ratings on Amazon within 100 days,
mm.
because I don't have a name everybody knows. I don't have a large budget, and I'm donating everything to the Boys and Girls Club, so I'm trying to keep my costs reasonable. Guess what? Guess what day I got 100 ratings?
What
On
day?
her birthday.
No way.
Way.
Oh.
So
Oh.
Madonna Bernadette was someone that I think struggled her entire life. She was 25 years old and had 5 kids, or was pregnant with her fifth,
Mm,
and really did her best, but was really called upon her faith to help get her through. And that was very important to her, and worked a lot. And she got up sometimes 4 or 5 in the morning to be able to say her prayers in time to be able to wake up and get the kids going, and so on. Because 5 kids within 6 years takes a little time. So when I went to college, I would talk to Mom nearly every day just to check in on her, because I kind of had her under my wing. And I knew she was getting up and talking, praying for people.
mhm,
And so I would say, "Mom, I got an exam coming up. Will you pray for me?" And she's like, "Of course, Janie, I'll pray for you."
mhm,
"Mom, Katie's got an exam too. Will you pray for Katie?" "Of course." "Mary, Katie, and Kim have exams. Will you pray for them?" "Of course I will." And I could tell she was writing all this stuff down.
mhm.
Well, the word started to spread, and people would come to me and ask for Madonna Bernadette's prayers. And I soon didn't know the people. So I was broke. Mom was going to pray anyway. So so I started saying, "Well, Mom will pray for you for $10, or you can light a candle for $20 on the stove, and she'll light a candle for you." And I was careful to write down all their names, because I didn't want to be responsible for flunking someone.
Mhm.
And I called my mom dutifully and said, "Mom, here's some people who have some exams going on. Will you please pray for them?" And she, "Yep, I can do that. Boy, you know a lot of people, Jane." You sure know a lot of people. I say, yeah, Mom, maybe you could write these down. And sure enough, she would pray for them. And at the end of the day, you can't guarantee that helped, but so many people came back and were repeat customers that at the very least, it enabled them to be relaxed enough in their exams. But I would argue that the Holy Spirit helped them as well,
That
or
is
at least
so
Madonna
funny.
Bernadette.
I must admit, this didn't come to me when I was reading the book, because I, of course, remember this happening. But as you're talking, I did. I'm sorry, but I did have one little visual of you like a medieval monk collecting indulgences and like pocketing the money. I know you weren't promising forgiveness, but I'm like,
Oh
there's
my
a
gosh.
little bit of
I really, because, I was raised very Catholic. I'm like, is this a direct route to hell? I'm not really sure that this is okay, but I got no money and I really need to be able to eat.
so
And
funny.
so, yeah, it was a little unconventional, but, and
A
I
true
didn't tell my
entrepreneur.
mom. I didn't tell my mom for years. And when I did, she was beside herself. And she ultimately thought it was pretty funny. And she says, well, I did pray for them.
She did, and it worked. It sounds like so. Hey,
Madonna Bernadette, you cannot make that up.
I love it. I love that part. It's so awesome. Okay. Next question is, you talk about how you've been called lots of things in your life,
I
right? You've been
have.
called a bulldog, a bitch, an
Mhm.
idiot, and also brilliant.
Mhm.
And I mean, obviously, you're super successful. So, how did you learn to navigate both the criticism and the praise?
It switched as time went on. Early in my career, it was easier for me to hear what I wasn't than what I was, because I was thinking and listening through the voice and of a kind of fear and anxiety, right? So John Gottman is a famous scientist and researcher, and his research says that there is a kind of a magic ratio of at least 5 to 1.
Mhm.
If you want someone to take, in order for someone to take away a positive versus a negative, you have to have at least 5 positives to every negative. Okay. So if you go in and you tell someone, hey, you did this great, but you kind of mucked this up, they will forget completely about the, hey, you did this great. And they will only remember the thing that says you mucked this up. So there was that. I don't think I ever very often heard 5 to 1 ratio. So my net takeaway was often the negative. And I would live in that space and I would churn in terms of what I needed to do better, which was both motivating, but also be debilitating.
Mm.
As I matured and advanced in my career, and what I would hope your listeners will do is think about is that 5 to 1, but also recognize that the feedback that you're receiving, especially if it's personal, is coming from where that person is. It may or may not have anything to do with where you are. It may not.
Mhm.
And there's a big difference between saying, again, what I did, I need to improve on versus I am a failure or I am unworthy, because you are worthy. You don't have to earn it. You are just plain worthy, and that you are learning and growing and you can make improvements, but that you are doing your best, and that's okay for today. The other thing I will say is that it used to really bother me when I was called names, labels, bitch, others. Really bothered me. Wow. Doesn't bother me at all anymore. It just doesn't. You can put a crown on my head with a label, positive or negative or otherwise, but only I choose whether to wear it. Only I choose whether to wear a crown or a thorn that says bitch or queen or anything else. I get to choose my own crowns, my own labels, for myself. And again, it's not about them, someone calling me a name. It's not about me. It's about them. And to be
Mhm.
clear, I can act a little bitchy sometimes. Big difference
Mhm, mhm. Sure.
between that and being a label,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. That's
Is
so
that
hard to
helpful?
do. It's totally helpful. It's totally helpful because I think it's just a retraining of the mind too, to remind ourselves of that constantly and just think, yeah, I like that visual too of like they can make the hat for me with a label on it, but I
Yes.
choose whether to put it on my head.
And it doesn't fit
Yeah.
me anymore. That label did not fit me. Maybe
Yeah.
it never did, but it's uncomfortable. It's hot. It doesn't fit me anymore. And I don't want to wear it. It's heavy and it's icky and I don't like it. And
Yeah.
I don't want to wear your label on my head.
Yeah.
Forget it.
I love
Your
it.
hat doesn't fit me. And you can, it's hard to learn, at the same time, again, so empowering to be in a room or to respond to someone from a place of strength and to be able to say, I appreciate how you feel. I don't feel that way. That's not who I am.
Yep.
And walk away. Or just not own it. Talk about a way to take the air out of their bag, their nonsense.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's one thing, hopefully, if we work at it, I don't think it's automatic that we get more able to do that as we age. I think we can get more able to do that as we age, but it doesn't happen on its own just by virtue of getting older, but it is getting easier for me as I get older because I'm working at it more and kind of retraining myself. So
I think we wound ourselves a lot.
yeah,
We do. And we re-wound ourselves with names and labels, et cetera. We really do. It's hard. But it does come from a feeling of self-worth. Knowing and claiming your worth and saying, I'm doing my best for today. This is what I got. No one should be able to have the right to take that away. No one should be able to take or imply your worth as less or more than anyone else because of title or money or heritage or skin color, gender, or anything else. That is not okay. And I'm not going to let that happen to myself.
So this kind of a connected question, how do you define success, or like what crown you want to put on your own head? What does success look like to you, and how has that evolved over the years?
So if you think about it professionally, because the two, professional and personal, have kind of merged and munged together. My husband says professionally, the biggest failure I've had is retiring. He said, you are failing at retiring. You have failed at retirement, because I don't like the word. I hate it, actually. Because what's happened is that I have redefined what success means to me. It used to be, gosh, I got this promotion or I did this. And success to me now isn't about achieving a title. It's about helping other people raise up. The very first and the very last stories in my book talk about a pickle bucket. When I was a child, we didn't have a lot of money, but we each had a 5-gallon pickle bucket that came from Matt's Cafe. Mine said Jane on it, and I used to scribble colored pictures on it and tape it on and so on, because it was where my repository of all the things that I put that I thought were valuable, my ribbons and my certificates and my, whatever that might be. And it was what told me I was worthy. I mattered. And then my dad threw the bucket away. That's a story, which was a bummer. But then I spent a lot of years trying to fill my pickle bucket with things, with degrees and with money and with all kinds of things, right? As we all do. And it's only been later in my life now that I define success as what we take out of the pickle bucket, because I've come to appreciate that we're all born with a pickle bucket and our bucket's full. It just is full. You don't have to put anything in it. You're born with a full pickle bucket. And it's what you take out and give to someone else that I define success by now. And it doesn't matter the amount of money you have or any of those things. We all have a gift to give. And it's in the giving that I really find my definition of success, which is why I'm failing at retirement. I've told my husband, there was a quote I read. It said, may your purpose and your passion be your life's work. And by that definition, I will never retire, because that means I'm not purposeful or passionate about the things that I'm doing anymore. I love this, if you can't tell. I do. I love it.
Like someone from your book and from this conversation, I'm like, you're just like my husband. It is going to be really hard for you to just like sit and not do something, right? I mean, you're really using your life, your one wild and precious life, to do good in the world. And I just love it.
I mean, I still love to go hiking, and I just adore my kids, and they're coming in later tonight, and it's an exciting weekend. I love that. But I am able, and as long as I'm able, I will do. And I love that too.
I love that. The next question I wanted to ask you about, actually, I was going to ask with a story from me, if that's okay.
Please do.
Because you mentioned mentorship and like giving out of the pickle bucket and how meaningful and how important that is. And because of the work I do with Breaking Down Patriarchy, thinking a lot about women and how to help women reach their potential and live their best lives, right? And so I want to ask you about mentorship, specifically about mentoring other women. And so I'll just mention this quick story, that when I went back to graduate school, when I started my master's degree at Stanford, I had, well, when I graduated from college, I was married and pregnant with my first child. And I was just thrilled that I was graduating from college, because that was a step further than a lot of the
Oh,
women in
yeah.
my life had gotten. And so I was rightfully just like so grateful and proud, and was like, well, the next step is being a mom. And that meant not working. And I had never pictured grad school for myself. Um, and then 4 kids later, and, many years later, I realized that although I loved, taking care of my kids, they were all in school by that point. And I thought, well, shoot, like what happens to the rest of my individual potential? And I wanted to go back to school. And I felt so unworthy and unqualified. And I was unqualified. I had taken so much time out of, the public sphere of public life or academia or anything. And as I was walking into class, I think it was the second or third week. And actually, now that I think about it, I wasn't in my master's program yet. I started by taking night classes at Stanford that were just continuing ed classes so that I could kind of get my feet back in. And just feeling that at that point, I thought there was no way I could do a master's degree, let alone at Stanford. And I had this class with this professor, and I felt so intimidated even being there. And he was this older man, and he taught at Stanford and Berkeley, and he was this beloved professor. And as I was walking in, kind of timidly, we just struck a conversation. And he asked something about me, and I said, oh, I'm just a mom. I have 4 kids, and, I'm just barely coming back to school. And I felt so stupid even saying it. And he said, I have 4 kids, and I didn't go back to graduate school until I was older also. And my wife and I took turns, and we both went back to get our undergraduate after our kids were a little older, and our graduate degrees. And we just took turns. And now he has a PhD and she has a PhD. And I can't tell you how, it meant the world to me. And not only did he kind of, make himself vulnerable also, and choose to have a personal conversation with me, which made me feel a little bit like I belonged. We still get together. Now it's on Zoom because I don't live in California anymore, but he checks in with me at least every 6 months. How are you doing? How's your work going? How are your kids doing? And he took me under his wing and has been a critical mentor for me. So I'll be grateful to him for the rest of my life. And I just wanted to share that. I think that's a story I've never shared on the podcast. And I so believe in the power of mentorship, because we just never know the story of the person we're interacting with and what they might need,
No, and you just don't know how your actions, your words may fill that void that someone else has and fill their cup with courage. You don't know. And people think they have to be, mentoring or influencing has to be something formal. It does not. It just doesn't. It's literally giving of your experience in a way that hopefully will help someone advance in their life or just get through a day in some cases.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I'd love to hear a story from you too, either of someone mentoring or helping you kind of advance and get a leg up, or something that you've done for someone else. It could be either one, just a story of mentorship from your life.
I have a story in the book of two gentlemen that I met within a very short window of each other. One gentleman's name was Kent, and he really was all about bringing people down to lift himself up. And he was about undoing you, not just, holding you down, but like he that's what his modus operandi was. And within a short period and he was a peer of mine, and he made it very clear that I was not qualified to be there because he was more experienced. He went to a better college. He just plain was a better person, obviously, because I was a pig farmer from Iowa that went to Iowa State, and really. Then Dudley comes into my office. I do not know his title. I do not know how he fits into the organization. He's eating a lollipop. He's kind of got a little bit of a belly that it keeps his extra ho-hos and hot dogs in. And he's lanky and he kind of folds into a chair that he doesn't fit in because it's just a crappy old chair, right? Because I'm a newbie. And he proceeds to ask me about myself and why I came to Kimberly Clark Corporation, and how where I went to school, and what did I have a family. And he made a personal connection with me, and he left my office. And it was only in watching him walk to his corner office, which was way the heck down. It wasn't like my boss's office or their boss's office. It was my boss's boss's office. He was the dude. And that made such an impression on me because he was just plain real. He wasn't a title. He didn't try to impress me or tell me what I needed to do to perform, to deliver, to, any of those things. And forever, when I met with Dudley, it was not, it was level agnostic, which I have adopted since, which means you're no more, you're no less than me. The title doesn't matter. It's what you contribute. And it was a key takeaway for me because when he walked in my door, that very first meeting, I had just come from a bad experience with Kent and was feeling all the things Kent wanted me to feel: inferior, unworthy. I was in the wrong place, all those things. And just like that, just by putting his lanky body in the chair and being real, like your guy, and welcoming me before I even knew where the coffee pot was, that's the guy that would have brought me the cup of coffee. And that made an impact on me. He taught me so much more about business and all those things afterwards. But what he taught me about being a person and being a leader didn't come from any textbook and didn't come from a stage. It came from a crappy old folding chair.
That's really beautiful. It strikes me also as we're talking that both of us chose examples where men mentored us. And I just have to put it out there too. Like sometimes my husband or my male friends will, and I will have conversations about like, we don't know, like, because I won't say that my husband and I have this conversation. It's usually with men who are older than me, actually, who are kind of struggling a little bit with how the world is changing. And like, I don't really know how to be a good man anymore. I don't, because do women want me to be a hero? Is that patronizing? I don't really know what to do. And I always really appreciate when I think of or encounter examples where I'm like, that's how you can be a really, like, I mean, if you want to call it heroic, like a really, really good guy is just by listening to women, lifting up women, making sure the door that to the rooms that you have access to are also open to
That's
women.
right.
But it's also so valuable to have women role models and women mentors. But I just thought it was interesting that for both of us, the ones we thought of first were actually a guy who was willing to share and
And he
eager
did
to
open
share the
doors for me, and he did advocate for me, and
Yep.
he did teach and correct me sometimes. You keep in mind, especially at senior levels, there weren't other women to be role models.
Yeah.
And sometimes women, I think, as they get more senior, they have more demands. They have a lot of demands. And I do believe sometimes women are reluctant to mentor because they themselves are struggling and don't
Yeah.
want people to see it. I had a rule. I created a rule about mentoring that if someone came to me and wanted to be mentored, I asked if they in turn would mentor 5 others, which feels like a lot, but I was mentoring so many more than 5 that I felt 5 was reasonable because I wanted to create scale. There aren't enough women in executive level or senior level or manager positions that I wanted someone that I was mentoring to mentor 5 others to start creating scale. And if they were unwilling, but sometimes people would say, I don't have time to mentor. To which I would respond, if you're not someone willing to help someone else out, I don't want to invest my precious time helping you when I could be helping someone else who will help others. And that was almost a litmus test because it both enabled that scale to exist to help others, but it also helped the person think, oh, give, get. You got to give to get. Um, Someone recently said, geez, Jane, don't you think that's kind of what I don't know the word she used. My word was kind of stuck up, or thinking a lot of yourself to ask someone to mentor 5 people to mentor with you. Never thought of it that way because at the time I was mentoring like a lot of people.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
so
not
yeah,
stuck up.
yeah.
No,
Well,
it's fantastic.
and I also have to say, people ask to be mentored.
Mhm.
Ask someone. You may. my advice to someone that says, how do I get someone to mentor me? Well, one, you can just ask, but sometimes that doesn't work. What
Mm-hmm.
I found works for me is even when I have a full platter and I don't want to truthfully have more bandwidth to mentor others, if
Mm-hmm.
someone asks to take me for coffee, I almost always say yes. Because you need to drink. Everybody needs to drink. Everybody likes a cup of coffee. And I almost always say yes. Just
Mm-hmm.
15 minutes, 20 minutes. And that will either open a door like your professor did.
Mm-hmm.
Your conversation didn't last long, but it opened a door.
Yep.
And will either open a door that you both mutually decide to walk through, or you'll discern that that's not the case, and maybe you'll take a nugget away, and that's like mentoring for a minute.
Yeah. 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 I love that. And I guess, I mean, we can't know beforehand which of those conversations are going to be transformative for the person. So I guess just being at peace with, like, yeah, a percentage won't, but a
Yeah.
percentage will. And so you just say yes to as many as you have bandwidth for, and can recognize that, like, yeah, and a lot of good will come of it. So
So many people have been reaching out since I've written the book, and I feel kind of bad because they have stories and they're like, oh my gosh, do you remember when you did this? It made such a difference, and so on. And I think everyone that wrote a book would have the same response, because what you may not even remember, that gentleman may not remember. Dudley probably he has no memory of sitting in my desk and what an
yeah,
impact he made, for sure.
yeah,
That's the golden thread that weaves us all together, that makes it beautiful. That's the tapestry we want to weave in our life.
yeah. I agree. Okay, a couple more questions. I want to know how your very down to earth kind of small town upbringing influences your leadership style, and specifically your approach to business.
A lot. The short answer is a lot.
Okay, yeah.
Um, I have two thoughts on that. The first is that as I moved up the professional ranks, especially when I got to Microsoft, which had a very strong culture of kind of eating its young, and I didn't have a tech background and I didn't really fit in. And literally at one meeting, someone took my shoe off my foot and said, show me that, because I see. And they looked at it and they passed it around the room because there was like such a dorky brand, right? Um, so I sought to be like them. I changed the way I dressed. I changed the brands. I changed the way I talked, and all the things that had made me, quote, successful in me, I sought to change. And it was a friggin' disaster. It was a disaster. I really did not get traction as I could or would have otherwise, I believe. That didn't work. At the same time, you take the best and leave the rest. Not everything I learned growing up was applicable. What was applicable that I have made a part of my leadership style is that there are three things that I look for when I hire someone. And I think many of those things were forged when I was a child: aptitude, ability, and attitude. Aptitude is, are you a round peg in a round hole, or are you a round peg in a square hole? Because if you're a round peg in a square hole, no amount of training is going to make you great at that job. You're probably not even passionate about it because you just don't fit. So you need to make sure aptitude's correct. Ability is really, are you trained appropriately? Do you have the seasoning for it? Do you have the support you need? Are you being set up for success? That's ability and training and so on. The third thing is attitude. And I learned working the cornfields of Iowa in some very difficult situations, if you have the right attitude, it's worth its weight in gold. You will get the right aptitude and the right ability. Attitude is everything. And likewise, if you don't have the right attitude, in my team, in my leadership, you get one chance and you're out, because it's a cancer, and I cut deep, cut quickly, and you're just gone. And in that regard, I am tough as nails. So I believe that there are no people that don't have ability, don't have aptitude at something. So nobody's a throwaway. Everybody can contribute something if you find the right place for them. And that that attitude part. The other thing that I learned is I am proud to be from Iowa. I am proud to be, plain speaking, of the dirt, someone that can simplify complexity. I don't value complexity. I value simplifying. It's who and what I am. And I'm not going to change that. If that's not okay, I appreciate that. If your yardstick measures something different than mine and you want me to change to your yardstick, it's not going to happen. And if you don't value my yardstick, that's probably not going to happen then either. So I would say that my background, where I grew up, was very much a part of what made me a leader. Also, that there's also a solution for anything. I had to work my way up from nothing through selling used carpeting, selling prayers, selling and doing a lot of things. There's always a way. And it seems to me the biggest difference between those who do and do not is the word yet. If I haven't done it, I just haven't done it yet.
Yep.
If I haven't figured it out, I just haven't figured it out yet. If it's
Yep.
important, I'll figure it out. Someone will help me. I'll get there. It's just a yet.
Yeah.
And that
I
came
love
from
it.
growing up in the Midwest,
I
growing up
love
in
that. I
rural
love that
Iowa.
attitude. I've tried to instill that in my kids too. Yeah, so powerful. It changes everything. One other thing that I was going to ask you, Jane, is that you talk about your struggle with bulimia in the book. And I found that incredibly brave, and I was very, very grateful for it. So many people, and especially women, struggle with disordered eating, and with also just kind of how you referred to it earlier, just not very healthy coping strategies when dealing with, tremendous stress. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that, specifically the bulimia, and then why was that important for you to share?
I went back and forth on that one because bulimia I was so ashamed. It was such a secret. My kids didn't know. My husband barely rocked. I mean, he knew, but it was not something I shared broadly. And I put it in there because I do think that whether it's alcohol, bulimia, drugs, etc., people that are experiencing a lot of stress often go to a coping mechanism that isn't healthy. In my case, it was bulimia, and it was a decades-long issue that I kept in the dark. Even for myself, I said in the book, in the stories about that. And boy, oh boy, did I not want to put those stories in there. Whew. But that's what I said when I said I turned myself inside out and showed my insides to the outside, because I think that was very real for me. And to say that I was being real in the book, in my stories, and not include that wasn't honest. It it brought me to my knees, and it was so formative, because I went to a 12-step program. That's what was available to me, and I got to the place where my title was very good, my life on the outside was very good, but on the inside, I was filled with unworthiness and FUD and all of these things, and did not know what to do with them, and I did not know who I was. And I was surrounded by people that provided for me unconditional love and a path forward. And it was interesting because I was in charge of this Scott paper business. And the people that helped me out were people that worked in the Scott paper union employees, low level. And it didn't matter. Again, level agnostic. And I put that in there because I think that we are only, when they say, there's an expression, you're only as sick as or healthy as the secrets you share. And I wanted to put myself out there because I do believe a lot of women struggle with bulimia, struggle with disordered eating. I would ask them to please come out of the closet and to please seek help and to be honest about it, because it is a bottomless pit that cannot be filled. It just can't be. And I was very graphic about my experience in that. And that's why. Not because I want to represent people with eating disorders, around the world, but because I wanted to show that you don't judge your insides by someone else's outsides. You never know. It's that humanity thing that we have to connect on, right?
Yeah.
Man, woman, gender, whatever that is, it's the common denominator of humanity. And if I wasn't willing to put my own out there, I didn't feel okay with that. And honestly, I've worked through it and I feel worthy. It is part of who I am and what I've become, and it's formative. And I wanted to share that.
That's incredibly courageous and so helpful. Again, like we've talked about already, just it's such a relief, you know what I mean, to read a book like this and just go, oh, phew, I'm not the only one who's had this struggle or that struggle, the only one who, beside, behind the facade feels
Yes.
unworthy or feels like I'm the only one who struggles in that way. So it's incredibly brave of you and will be so helpful to people. So yeah, kudos to you.
Thank you. I want everyone to realize they're not the only one. I've been really surprised by the number of men that say they can relate to it, because it turns out they have this facade they have to put up too, which isn't that. At least as women, we have friends that we share at a very intimate level, I think, and so on. And a lot of men don't have that, but that's their thing. I wrote the book as a collection of 50 stories. It wasn't my intent to write a book. It was my promise to others that I would write down my stories, and they became this book. And in the process of doing that, it provided healing for myself. And what I'm hearing is it's providing healing, inspiration, encouragement for other people to rethink what they think is possible, which, yay.
Yep, that's definitely my takeaway from the book. I really highly recommend it to listeners, to anybody watching. And I'm wondering, I guess as our time is now up,
It
this has been
is.
such a delight to talk, but I'm wondering if there is maybe just a final takeaway that you want people to take away from the book, or um, some final insight about personal empowerment that you want to say as we wrap up.
I would say that you are worthy just as you are. It's not something you have to earn. It's not something you get with the title or anything else. And overcoming the uns in your life is really important. No one can do that for you. Overcoming those limitations, those circumstances, those people, those voices, including your own voice that keeps you small, that tells you what you can't, won't, or shouldn't do. You don't have to have it all figured out before you take that step. You just need to take one step, one day at a time, and it adds up. And it was only in doing hard things I couldn't imagine that I began to imagine myself differently. So don't be afraid of being afraid, and don't be afraid of doing the hard things one day at a time that you can't imagine, because you will imagine yourself differently. You will imagine yourself as that person you want to be.
Hmm. Well, thank you. Thank you, Jane. Again, Jane Boulware, the author of Unworthy from Court. I have to make sure I read it correctly. Okay, sorry. Once again, this is Jane Boulware, and her book is Worthy, From Cornfields to Corner Office of Microsoft. And I just can't thank you enough, Jane. This has been a delight and so inspiring. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Amy. It's been a lot of fun talking with you.